everybody. Jeff Katz back with you, now taking you here into week 3 of The Underground as we see our last time on Star Trek The Next Generation. I have to think of the series that would do that. Although Star Trek would only do that if there was a two-parter.
You just got stoned.
I'd also recommend Star Trek Deep Space Nine, by the way. The single best discovery of any show that I discovered over pandemic. Deep Space Nine, excellent writing. Imagine that said as Iron Sheik, by the way. You ask excellent question. But would really recommend that show. I've been trying to get MVP to watch it. MVP keeps resisting me. But as the Borg would say, resistance is futile. And now here we go, as you see from the preview last week, as we go into the Joe Davola entrance, as I call it. This is going to be 1600 against Dread. 1600, we've talked a couple times, was supposed to be an SAT reference. They changed that on us. That's going to be Ryan Kidd taking on Brandon Howard as Dread. We see Nick Lovin as King here. And, you know, the idea with King is to sort of layer him in as a manipulator, a sort of weasel behind the scenes who doesn't get his hands dirty, so that ultimately, in the end, when he does get his hands dirty, it's a payoff to something that has been set up. That is the thinking here going in.
Everybody, DJ K back here.
As you hear me, DJ K, my little nod to SSX, the excellent video game. Big fan of that entire series.
Look at this guy.
Ryan Kidd, really talented, really nice young man, and just perfect for what I needed. This was another one of those situations, as we see Dread now entering, where, you know, you had a lot of talent in Southern California that was young, that looked young, and that size-wise played young. And this was one of those interesting opportunities in wrestling where you actually wanted people that played and looked young at a size level. So, like, 1600 doesn't work if he's Brian Cage as a teenager, although I don't know what Cage looked like as a teenager. Great guy to work with as well. John Cage, half of the Jontourage, of course, in the WRP universe. Teamed with Eli Drake, John Ricker, with their executive bodyguard, Brick Shithouse. Big fan of theirs. You know, it's funny in going back and looking at this, I'd frankly forgotten the fact that this was basically, if you've watched any of the WRP commentaries, I mentioned a few times that, like, you know, I went through a lot of changes in the aftermath of all this stuff, but maybe the most obvious and biggest is I dropped about 120 pounds and really got myself in way better shape. And I was reminded, I hadn't thought about this, and I was working out this morning and thinking about doing another one of these commentaries, when I realized that it was really the Underground, right when we wrapped production, that I first started getting my ass back out and running and starting the build. It took me about a year to drop the 120 pounds, and I've kept it off generally for the most part ever since. Really recommend it, by the way, as well. It's one of the best changes you can make for yourself. At a lifestyle level. And it has to be a lifestyle thing. It can't be a diet. But anyway, was sort of reminded of that. Also, I do want to shout out a guy who just passed away, one of my real mentors in the business, both from a producing and filmmaking point of view, and a guy that influenced me on the wrestling end as well, though maybe less obvious. Dick Donner passed away about a month ago. And I had the pleasure of working with Dick for a year. And it was actually Dick and his wife, Lauren, who sat me down after we'd spent a year in Australia on a movie together and said, hey, you need to get your ass in shape. And the fact that they cared about me enough to do that said a lot about Dick and Lauren. And Lauren had her husband before Dick was a heavier guy who had a heart attack and died young. And Dick was just a really special guy. I learned more from him. He's on the very short list of people I learned the most from in my career. And it's just, as I go and I look back at this, both from the filmmaking point of view and ultimately making the decision to go lose the weight and get in shape right when this show had started wrapping, I have to thank Dick and remember him for this. Dick Donner, if you're not familiar, did the first 2 Superman movies, all the Lethal Weapon films, The Omen. Just a legend, a master of working across genres. And that was a really big inspiration. As you see a USC Trojan Destroyer there by Dread, a big influence, though, in terms of my trying to explore different subgenres within wrestling. If you look at Dick's filmography, it was he did everything. You know, he did Scrooge, he did Maverick, and then he would go do 4 Lethal Weapons, and then bring Damien the Omen to the screen, you know, for for good measure. So just anyway, your mentors are important in life, and I've been lucky to have a few great ones, and he was one of them. And he will be missed for a very long time. Beautiful move there by Brandon is Dread. Excellent SAT reference by me there as well. And I don't want to do these guys short shrift. You're going to see both of them be players throughout. And, Brandon Howard, I will talk about as we go through this. It's interesting because 1600 is playing the intellectual, the nebbish, the geek, the sort of 1-2-3 kid character. Brandon Howard literally was going to USC while doing this. And going back and forth from campus, making sure he hit his classwork. Very impressive. And just in toto, an incredibly interesting, smart, and ambitious group of young people that were a lot of fun to work with. And I in hindsight, I look at Jeff Dino and the guys down at SoCal Pro in San Diego. We've got a little extra pepper. Dread not done. And this is a classic. Gets over to the audience in 2 seconds flat. This guy is the heel. This other guy is the underdog babyface. And somewhat glutton for punishment. I wonder if 1600 might have to rise to the occasion ultimately before this season is over. But this is really about sort of establishing the two characters in a quick hit fashion. Because, again, the point of what Google and YouTube wanted when they did these deals was everything had to be sort of short form, under 15 minutes or so. And by the way, this was like a decade ago, so it shows you how stupid stuff like Quibi was, where the idea they were presenting this as a new concept that hadn't been attempted like 85 times before by all sorts of people in the mobile and digital space. It was ridiculous, but that's a separate audio commentary. So we see Ryan Kidd, 1600 laying it out there. And, well, there you go. And so this sort of worked. And again, these were extras, but we didn't coach them on what to do in terms of reaction. We asked them for authentic reaction, similar to what we did with WRP. They knew their job was to be there as an audience, but the storytelling was clear enough that they understood to sort of root him back to his feet. And, not rocket science ultimately, which is the most of my booking approach. I try to be interesting and adult and have some depth and layers, but keep it simple, stupid. I always go back to that. Now, as we go to the feed, this little quick hit segment, this was shot up in another portion of the warehouse in downtown L.A. This warehouse location, I think, used all the time for a bunch of different stuff. We looked at 2 or 3, but this one was a pretty easy fit because we loved the upper deck and being able to go and put both from a GoPro, fans up there, etc. So you see the Shayna and Luther thing's going to keep moving. And now, Hayashi 1600, this is a friendship and a relationship we want to establish early because it's ultimately going to pay off to the point they're going to host the recap episode towards the end of the season. And now Blade's coming in. He's not rocking the black turtleneck like Jobs, instead sort of the black zip-up sort of deal. Appropriately douchey. Really liked working with Renee. Liked all these guys, really. I can't say... I've been very lucky throughout my career. Oh, and really quick, as we see the CW, again, element here, further establishing that Stone and Liz had a relationship or had some sort of connection before ultimately Stone and PW3 were driven apart. And a nice chance for Nick to get to show a little extra different side of himself. Can't say enough about how game all these guys were. The Young Bucks particularly, in terms of doing the job and trying to do different characters and approaching it with enthusiasm and verve. And honestly, as I was saying to finish my earlier point, through my career, I've been very lucky. I can think of one person I've ever worked with that I wouldn't want to work with again. It was an actor on a movie I did. And on the wrestling end, an incredible group of talent, all of whom attitudinally spectacular. And so we'll get into that and a whole lot more coming up next year on the next episode as we look at the Underground.